Combate, a trincheira do contribuinte. Menos impostos, mais empregos.
Boa noite, amigos e amigas. Estamos iniciando um novo programa Combate, programa da Confederação Nacional de Serviços. Mais emprego e menos impostos. Aproveitando para desejar um bom ano a todos, um bom 2011 a todos os telespectadores e nossos amigos. Hoje nós vamos apresentar uma palestra importantíssima feita pelo famoso tributarista que nasceu na Itália, chama-se Vito Tanzi. É um especialista em tributação, mas reside, inclusive, ele é o PhD de Economia de Hardware da Universidade e reside atualmente nos Estados Unidos. É um consultor internacional, inclusive do FMI e do Departamento de Finanças Públicas do FMI. Essa palestra foi promovida num segundo colóquio internacional de núcleos de estudos fiscais de direito da GV, que é presidido e coordenado pelo professor Eurico Marcos Diniz de Santi, um especialista em assuntos tributários, que muito conceituado no nosso ambiente universitário. E esse colóquio internacional serviu para foi discutido nesse evento uma possibilidade de reforma tributária, simplificação do sistema, viabilidade e, inclusive, transparência nesse processo tributário. Acredito que essa palestra, feita pelo professor Vito Tanzi, no encerramento, inclusive, desse evento, será de suma importância para informar aos senhores telespectadores qual é a visão de um economista internacional sobre o nosso sistema tributário e quais são as perspectivas que a gente poderia implementar nessa reforma tributária. Nós participamos desse evento e colocamos, inclusive, para o professor Vito Tanzi a possibilidade de implementação do imposto sobre alimentação financeira para arrecadar os recursos de contribuição de INSS sobre folha de pagamento, diminuindo os seus custos da mão de obra. Ele vai falar um pouquinho sobre esse assunto também e vai se colocar qual é o posicionamento com relação a isso. Esperamos que seja de agrado dos senhores essa palestra e seja e dá a possibilidade para que nós entendemos um pouquinho qual é a visão internacional sobre o sistema tributário, não só do nosso país, como de outros países. A palestra, infelizmente, não é em português, é em inglês, mas eu acredito que da forma como ele se expôs os seus pontos de vista, seja bastante compreensível para a maioria dos telespectadores. Muito obrigado.
La prossima vez que vengo em Brasil vou a falar português ou portunholo, português, não sei. Pero esta vez não tenho alternativa que falar em inglês. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Núcleo de Estudio Fiscal de Getúlio Vargas for this invitation. I very much appreciate it. I've had some occasional contact with Brazil for almost 40 years. You know, one time my boss was a Brazilian, Gerson da Silva. You know, I worked very close with him. In fact, it's mentioned in this particular book that was mentioned, The Charm of Latin America. And you know, I was introduced to Brazil about in the 60s, I think, the late 60s, when Brasilia still did not exist, and I used to come to Rio de Janeiro for visits. I've not been involved very much frequently, but periodically, continually over almost 40 years. Maybe I should also say that I found this this discussion today really fascinating, and it convinced me of something that really I'm going to say in the paper, that lawyers and economists, maybe they should marry, or at least should spend a lot of time together. No, it's really embarrassing how separate these two worlds are. You know, people, as I say in the paper, people get a Nobel Prize in economics for writing a mathematical equation which is supposed to define tax systems, and then we spend a full day here going into the incredible amount of details on how systems really operate. I should also add, by the way, how much time I have? Yeah, okay, that's better. I should say that the problem of complexity is not limited to taxation. In fact, I began to become really interested in this topic when I had to write a paper in honor of a prominent Italian economist called Mario Nuti. Mario Nuti was an expert on centrally planned economies, and he did a lot of work on this. He was also an expert on a very controversial area of economics called the Cambridge controversy, which was related to Piero Sraffa, who was a major Italian economist who during Mussolini time moved to Cambridge and made some important theoretical contribution. So anyway, I had to write this paper for Nutis, and I wrote a paper on complexity, not complexity in taxation, but complexity in general. And starting with the premise that because Nuti was an expert, as I said, on centrally planned economies, I started by asking myself the question, why centrally planned economies disintegrated, did not work after 70 years of experimentation from the Bolshevik Revolution on. And I mentioned that there were probably three factors that were important. One was incentives. All economists who have written on this theme, they've always identified the lack of incentives that exist in a command economy, where people are commanded to do things, but they don't have a direct personal incentive in what they do. The second one was corruption. As you move from the 20s to the 90s, the 80s and 90s, the people who were involved in these economies lost their revolutionary spirit that made them like saints or monks, and became more and more corrupt bureaucrats. So that was clearly a second thing. But the third element, which brings more close to the discussion of today, was complexity. And in that particular paper, that is anybody who is interested, I can give the reference to it. It's an interesting paper. In that paper, I mentioned that if you have a planned economy, and you have an economy like Mao Zedong, where you produce tunics, shirts, maybe in two sizes and nothing else, and maybe you produce potatoes and a few other things, planning is relatively easy. But by the time you begin to move to thousands of products and more differentiated kind of product, by the time you move from Mao tunics to Ferrero or Chanel's suits or dresses, the world becomes much more complicated. So this, so this was clearly one of the elements. There were tremendously successful mathematicians at the time in Russia trying to develop all sorts of systems of equations, but essentially they failed. They could not cope with this increasing complexity. Then I asked myself the question, well, is something similar happening to market economy? And this was really a central question. And in that particular paper, which is not this paper, it's a different one, I came to the sad conclusion that something similar is going on. And I list different areas of market economies, from development of a large technological system, the space shuttle. Why did the space shuttle explode at a certain moment? Why sometimes big jets, the most modern jets, disappear on the Atlantic and nobody knows why. Why atomic energy plants sometimes go wrong. And it goes back to the question that complexity, the system becomes so complex that you cannot anticipate what can happen. Two, three things may go wrong. And then I asked, well, is something similar is happening in other areas outside of the technology? What about the financial market? Well, my paper was written in 2005, and there is a point in the paper where I say, well, the financial market is going to have a major problem. So I did not anticipate as 2008 as the date of the problem, but clearly because of this complexity, and I discussed complexity in the financial market, derivatives that, movement of capital that nobody knew about and so forth. And then what about the tax system? And I began to develop the view that in the tax system there's something similar, but it's not limited to the tax system. Something similar is happening on the expenditure side. Things have become so complicated. The budget, nobody knows really anymore what the fiscal deficit of a country is. Do you take the current deficit, cash, or accrual? You put longer-term commitments to pension funds. You put the contingent liabilities in or out. It's the trouble is that really, look at Belgium. Greece. From one day to another, you discover that the deficit of Greece was not 3%, but was 12%. And this was, the European Commission was following. Supposedly, they were keeping track of what was going on. And this really is happening in many areas. In fact, one of my projects, if I have the energy and I keep the interest, will be to write a book in which I inserted, maybe this could become a chapter, the paper that was circulated, but go into the other area, measurement of benefits from a public expenditure, measuring of fiscal deficit, measuring of public debt. We accept these figures of public debt. But how do you know? I know that in Italy, where I was in the government at one point, the public debt never includes the debt of the health sector, because you don't have the statistics update. You get the statistics several years later. So that when you look at in the US, the debt does not include the debt of the state and local governments, because you don't have the information. So, all of these things, we are really moving into an area which is really worrisome. And that's, now, going more directly back to the topic of today, and the discussion today is essentially on this topic, that the tax system is becoming more and more complicated, and almost everybody that intervened today agreed with that. I will discuss three different parts. One, section 2 of the paper that discusses the factors that contribute to tax complexity. How does tax complexity come about? Is it something automatic, or is it something more that there are factors that automatically bring it along? Section 3 I will discuss, it's an interesting section, we'll discuss what I call agents of complexity. Who are the people who operate in this area? The section is focused mainly on the US, because I had the better elements for that, but I suppose that one could write the same section for Brazil, and maybe with different actors or different emphasis, but to get something similar. Then I discuss the consequences of complexity, and then some measurement of complexity. Well, as I said earlier, economists, maybe they should be considered the architect of a tax systems. They are the one who delineate the great framework of them. And, but we have to recognize at the beginning they are not the people who write the tax laws. The tax laws normally are written by lawyers, by accountants, by different people. Really, when we make the distinction